Aiko, a young woman in her late 20s, arriving in the remote mountain village of Kurakawa. The village is shrouded in perpetual mist, with dense ancient forests pressing in on all sides. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the only sounds are the distant cawing of crows and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Aiko steps off the rickety bus, her suitcase in hand, and takes in her new surroundings. The village is eerily quiet, with only a few villagers visible, their faces shadowed and wary. They glance at her briefly before turning away, muttering to themselves. Aiko feels a pang of unease but brushes it off, telling herself she's just tired from the long journey. As Aiko walks toward the small inn where she'll be staying, she hears a commotion near the edge of the forest. A middle-aged villager, Takeshi, is shouting and struggling against an unseen force. His eyes are wide with terror, and he claws at the ground as if trying to anchor himself. Aiko drops her suitcase and runs toward him, but before she can reach him, he is yanked into the trees with inhuman strength. The villagers who witness the event freeze in place, their faces pale and expressionless. One of them, an elderly woman, mutters, "The Yamamba has taken him." Aiko is left shaken, her heart pounding. She turns to the villagers for answers, but they refuse to speak to her, quickly dispersing and leaving her alone at the forest's edge. The trees seem to loom taller, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. The next morning, Aiko learns that Takeshi has been found alive, but completely catatonic. She visits his home, where his wife Yumi sits by his side, her face gaunt and tear-streaked. Takeshi stares blankly at the wall, his lips moving faintly as he repeats, "The woman in the trees. She's waiting for you." Aiko feels a chill run down her spine. She tries to comfort Yumi, but the woman recoils, saying, "You shouldn't have come here. The forest doesn't like outsiders." As Aiko leaves the house, she notices a group of villagers gathered nearby, whispering and casting furtive glances in her direction. One of them, a young boy, points at her and says, "She's next." That night, Aiko lies awake in her room at the inn, unable to shake the image of Takeshi's hollow eyes and the villagers' fearful whispers. As she stares at the ceiling, she hears a faint whisper coming from outside her window. It sounds like her name, spoken in a voice she hasn't heard in years, Emi's voice. Aiko sits up, her heart racing. She approaches the window and peers into the darkness. The forest is barely visible in the moonlight, its shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. Suddenly, she sees a figure standing at the edge of the trees, a small, familiar silhouette with long hair. "Emi?" Aiko whispers, her voice trembling. The figure turns, and for a moment, Aiko sees her sister's face. But then the figure's eyes glow with an unnatural light, and its mouth stretches into a grotesque, inhuman smile. Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. When she looks again, the figure is gone. The next morning, Aiko wakes up feeling disoriented. Her feet are caked with dirt, and her hands are scratched and bruised, as if she had been walking through the forest in her sleep. She has no memory of leaving her room, but the evidence is undeniable. As she washes her hands, she notices a faint mark on her wrist, a symbol she doesn't recognize, carved into her skin. It matches the symbols she saw on the shrine in her dreams. Aiko looks out the window at the forest, its dark silhouette looming in the distance. Despite her fear, she feels an inexplicable pull toward the trees, as if something, or someone, is calling her. Aiko trying to settle into her new life in Kurakawa. She spends her days exploring the village, attempting to connect with the villagers, but they remain distant and wary. The only person who shows her kindness is Tomoe, a woman in her 40s who runs a small tea shop. Tomoe offers Aiko a cup of tea and a sympathetic ear, though she avoids talking about the forest or the Yamamba. Aiko notices that the villagers often leave small offerings, rice, fruit, or strips of cloth, at the edge of the forest. When she asks Tomo about it, the woman hesitates before saying, "It's better not to ask too many questions. Some things are best left alone." One night, Aiko wakes up in the forest, disoriented and cold. Her feet are bare and scratched, and her nightgown is damp with dew. In her hands, she clutches a crude doll made of twigs and leaves. The doll's face is eerily detailed, with small stones for eyes and a twisted mouth made of bark. As Aiko stares at the doll, she realizes it resembles Emi. The doll's eyes seem to follow her, and she hears faint laughter echoing from the trees. Panicked, She drops the doll and stumbles back, but the laughter grows louder, surrounding her. She runs blindly through the forest, the trees seeming to close in around her, until she finally bursts into the village square. The villagers who see her recoil in fear, muttering about the Yamamba's curse. Aiko collapses on the steps of the inn, clutching the doll to her chest, her mind racing with questions. The next morning, Aiko wakes up in her room, the doll lying on the floor beside her bed. She tries to convince herself it was just a dream, but the scratches on her feet and the dirt on her nightgown tell a different story. As she prepares for the day, she hears a commotion outside. The villagers are gathered around Tomo's tea shop, their faces pale and grim. Aiko pushes through the crowd and sees Tomo's body lying on the floor, her eyes wide with terror. Her body is twisted unnaturally, as if she had been trying to flee something, or someone. Aiko notices something strange. Tomo's hands are clasped together, as if in prayer, and her face is turned toward the forest. The villagers whisper that the Yamamba took her, but Aiko can't shake the feeling that there's more to the story. Aiko visits Tomoe's tea shop later that day, hoping to find some clue about what happened. She discovers a small notebook hidden under the counter, filled with cryptic notes and sketches. One page stands out, a drawing of the forest with the words, "She walks among us," scrawled beneath it. As Aiko flips through the notebook, she finds a list of names, including her own. Next to her name is a single word, chosen. Aiko's mind races. Could the Yamamba be someone in the village? Is it possible that the spirit is not just a supernatural entity, but a person? Or something that takes on human form? That night, Aiko lies awake, unable to shake the image of Tomo's lifeless body and the cryptic notes in her notebook. As she stares at the ceiling, she hears the whispers again, faint, indistinct voices calling her name. She gets up and approaches the window, her heart pounding. The forest is bathed in moonlight, its shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. The whispers grow louder, and Aiko sees movement among the trees, figures darting between the trunks, their eyes glowing faintly. One of the figures steps into the clearing, and Aiko recognizes her. It's Tomo, her face pale and her eyes empty. Tomo raises a hand, pointing toward the forest, and whispers, "She's waiting for you." Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. When she looks again, the figure is gone, and the forest is silent. Aiko, determined to uncover the truth about the Yamamba and its connection to the village. She spends her days poring over Tomo's notebook, trying to decipher the cryptic notes and sketches. One page catches her attention, a rough map of the forest with a marked location deep within the trees. The words, "The Shrine of Sorrow," are scrawled beside it. Aiko decides to investigate, despite the villagers' warnings. She packs a small bag with supplies and sets off toward the forest, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The forest is eerily silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves under her feet and the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. After hours of walking, Aiko stumbles upon the shrine. It's a small, weathered structure made of stone, covered in moss and vines. The air around it feels heavy, and the trees seem to lean inward, as if trying to shield it from view. Inside the shrine, Aiko finds an assortment of offerings, rotting fruit, wilted flowers, and small trinkets. But what catches her eye is a lock of hair tied with a red ribbon. It's identical to Emi's hair, down to the slight wave and golden hue. As Aiko reaches out to touch the lock of hair, she is suddenly overwhelmed by a vision. She sees herself standing on a busy street, arguing with Emi. The memory is vivid and painful, but this time, something is different. In the vision, Aiko pushes Emi into the path of an oncoming car. The sound of screeching tires and Emi's scream echo in her mind as the vision fades. Aiko collapses to her knees, gasping for breath. Her hands tremble as she clutches the lock of hair, her mind racing. Was this the truth? Had she been responsible for Emi's death all along? Shaken but determined, Aiko continues to explore the shrine. As she examines the offerings, she hears a faint whisper. "Aiko." She turns and sees a figure standing among the trees, a small, familiar silhouette with long hair. It's Emi, or at least, it looks like her. Aiko's heart leaps with a mix of hope and fear as she calls out, "Emi? Is that you?" The figure turns, and for a moment, Aiko sees her sister's face. But then the figure's features twist and distort, its mouth stretching into a grotesque, inhuman smile. The eyes glow with an unnatural light, and the figure whispers, You already know the truth. Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. The figure, now clearly the Yamamba, laughs softly before vanishing into the trees. Aiko returns to the village, her mind reeling from what she's seen. She tries to confront the villagers about the shrine and the lock of hair, but they refuse to speak to her. One of them, an elderly man named Hideo, finally snaps, "You shouldn't have gone there. The Yamamba doesn't forgive those who disturb her shrine." Aiko notices that the villagers are leaving more offerings at the edge of the forest, their faces grim and fearful. She realizes that the shrine is not just a place of worship, it's a place of appeasement, a way to keep the Yamamba at bay. That night, Aiko lies awake, unable to shake the vision of Emi's death. She replays the memory in her mind, questioning every detail. Was it possible that she had pushed Emi? Or was the Yamamba manipulating her, twisting her memories to break her spirit? As she stares at the ceiling, she hears the whispers again. Faint, indistinct voices calling her name. She gets up and approaches the window, her heart pounding. The forest is bathed in moonlight, its shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. Aiko sees movement among the trees, figures darting between the trunks, their eyes glowing faintly. One of the figures steps into the clearing, and Aiko recognizes her. It's Emi, her face pale and her eyes empty. Emi raises a hand, pointing toward the forest, and whispers, "She's waiting for you." Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. When she looks again, the figure is gone, and the forest is silent. Aiko's sitting in her room at the inn, surrounded by Tomo's notebook and the lock of hair she found at the shrine. Her mind is a whirlwind of questions and doubts. Was the vision of Emi's death real? Could she have been responsible? And what is the connection between the shrine, the Yamamba, and the villagers? Determined to find answers, Aiko decides to seek out Haru, the elderly woman who seems to know more about the Yamamba than anyone else. She finds Haru sitting outside her small, weathered home, weaving a basket from dried reeds. The old woman's hands are steady, but her eyes are clouded with sorrow. Haru reluctantly agrees to speak with Aiko, but only after Aiko promises to leave the village once she knows the truth. The old woman leads her inside and begins to tell the story of Yuri, a woman who lived in the village decades ago. Yuri was a young mother who lost her child to a tragic accident. Overwhelmed by grief, she wandered into the forest and never returned. The villagers believed she had died, but soon after, strange things began to happen. People who entered the forest would disappear, and those who returned were never the same. Haru reveals that Yuri became the Yamamba, her grief and rage transforming her into a malevolent spirit. The curse has been passed down through generations, with each new Yamamba feeding on the guilt and sorrow of those who enter the forest. Aiko is stunned. So, the Yamamba isn't just a spirit, it's a curse that keeps repeating itself? Haru nods, her expression grim. And now, it has chosen you. As Aiko processes Haru's revelation, a commotion erupts outside. The villagers are gathered near the forest's edge, their faces pale and fearful. Aiko and Haru rush to see what's happening. They find Haru's grandson, Kenta, lying on the ground, his body twisted unnaturally. His eyes are wide with terror, and his mouth is frozen in a silent scream. Surrounding his body are offerings of food and hair, arranged in a ritualistic pattern. The villagers whisper that Kenta had been trying to appease the Yamamba, but Aiko notices something strange. The offerings are identical to those she saw at the shrine. She realizes that Kenta must have known more about the curse than he let on. Haru collapses beside her grandson's body, her sobs echoing through the silent forest. Aiko feels a pang of guilt, wondering if her presence in the village has somehow triggered the curse. That night, Aiko lies awake, unable to shake the image of Kenta's lifeless body and the offerings surrounding him. She hears the whispers again, faint and indistinct, calling her name. She gets up and approaches the window, her heart pounding. The forest is bathed in moonlight, its shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. Aiko sees movement among the trees, figures darting between the trunks, their eyes glowing faintly. One of the figures steps into the clearing, and Aiko recognizes her. It's Yuri, her face pale and her eyes empty. Yuri raises a hand, pointing toward the forest, and whispers, "You cannot escape." Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. When she looks again, the figure is gone, and the forest is silent. Aiko sitting in her room at the inn, surrounded by Tomo's notebook and the lock of hair she found at the shrine. Her mind is a whirlwind of questions and doubts. Was the vision of Emi's death real? Could she have been responsible? And what is the connection between the shrine, the Yamamba, and the villagers? Determined to find answers, Aiko decides to seek out Haru, the elderly woman who seems to know more about the Yamamba than anyone else. She finds Haru sitting outside her small, weathered home, weaving a basket from dried reeds. The old woman's hands are steady, but her eyes are clouded with sorrow. Haru reluctantly agrees to speak with Aiko, but only after Aiko promises to leave the village once she knows the truth. The old woman leads her inside and begins to tell the story of Yuri, a woman who lived in the village decades ago. Yuri was a young mother who lost her child to a tragic accident. Overwhelmed by grief, she wandered into the forest and never returned. The villagers believed she had died, but soon after, strange things began to happen. People who entered the forest would disappear, and those who returned were never the same. Haru reveals that Yuri became the Yamamba, her grief and rage transforming her into a malevolent spirit. The curse has been passed down through generations, with each new Yamamba feeding on the guilt and sorrow of those who enter the forest. Aiko is stunned. So, the Yamamba isn't just a spirit, it's a curse that keeps repeating itself? Haru nods, her expression grim. And now, it has chosen you. As Aiko processes Haru's revelation, a commotion erupts outside. The villagers are gathered near the forest's edge, their faces pale and fearful. Aiko and Haru rush to see what's happening. They find Haru's grandson, Kenta, lying on the ground, his body twisted unnaturally. His eyes are wide with terror, and his mouth is frozen in a silent scream. Surrounding his body are offerings of food and hair, arranged in a ritualistic pattern. The villagers whisper that Kenta had been trying to appease the Yamamba, but Aiko notices something strange. The offerings are identical to those she saw at the shrine. She realizes that Kenta must have known more about the curse than he let on. Haru collapses beside her grandson's body, her sobs echoing through the silent forest. Aiko feels a pang of guilt, wondering if her presence in the village has somehow triggered the curse. That night, Aiko lies awake, unable to shake the image of Kenta's lifeless body and the offerings surrounding him. She hears the whispers again, faint and indistinct, calling her name. She gets up and approaches the window, her heart pounding. The forest is bathed in moonlight, its shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. Aiko sees movement among the trees, figures darting between the trunks, their eyes glowing faintly. One of the figures steps into the clearing, and Aiko recognizes her. It's Yuri, her face pale and her eyes empty. Yuri raises a hand, pointing toward the forest, and whispers, "You cannot escape." Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. When she looks again, the figure is gone, and the forest is silent. Aiko sitting in her room at the inn, her mind racing with the revelations from Haru about Yuri and the curse of the Yamamba. She feels a growing sense of dread, as if the forest is closing in around her. The whispers have become a constant presence, a low hum in the back of her mind that she can't escape. Aiko tries to distract herself by examining the symbols she saw at the shrine and in Tomo's notebook. She sketches them on a piece of paper, hoping to find a pattern or meaning, but the symbols seem to shift and twist under her gaze, as if they're alive. That night, Aiko's sleepwalking episodes take a terrifying turn. She wakes up in the middle of the night, her hands covered in blood. At first, she thinks she's been attacked, but then she notices the source of the blood, her own arm. Carved into her skin are the same symbols she saw at the shrine, crude and jagged, but unmistakable. Aiko feels a surge of panic and confusion. Did she do this to herself? Or was it the Yamamba, using her body as a vessel? She stumbles to the bathroom to clean the wounds, her hands trembling. As she looks in the mirror, she sees something that makes her blood run cold. Her reflection is smiling, but she isn't. The next morning, Aiko seeks out Haru, desperate for answers. She shows the old woman the symbols carved into her arm. Haru's eyes widen with fear and recognition. "These are warding marks," Haru says, her voice trembling. "Ancient symbols meant to protect against evil spirits. Your subconscious is trying to fight the Yamamba, but it may not be enough." Aiko feels a flicker of hope, but it's quickly extinguished when Haru adds, "The Yamamba is stronger than any warding marks. If it has chosen you, there may be no escape." That night, Aiko lies awake, her mind racing with fear and doubt. The whispers are louder now, almost deafening, and she feels a growing pressure in her chest, as if something is trying to claw its way out. She gets up and approaches the mirror, her heart pounding. At first, her reflection is normal, but then it begins to move independently, its movements jerky and unnatural. The reflection's mouth stretches into a grotesque smile, and its eyes glow with an unnatural light. "You're already mine," the reflection whispers, its voice a distorted echo of Aiko's own. Aiko stumbles back, her breath catching in her throat. The reflection lunges at her, its hands clawing at the glass as if trying to break through. Aiko screams and covers her eyes, but when she looks again, the reflection is normal. Aiko standing at the edge of the forest, her mind made up. She knows she must perform the ritual to confront the Yamamba and break the curse, even if it means risking her life. The villagers have grown increasingly hostile, their whispers and sidelong glances making it clear that they see her as a threat. Aiko carries a small bag with the items she needs for the ritual. A lock of Emi's hair, a handful of salt, and a knife. The forest looms before her, its shadows deep and impenetrable. She takes a deep breath and steps into the trees, the whispers growing louder with each step. As Aiko makes her way to the shrine, she is suddenly surrounded by the villagers. Their faces are grim, and they carry torches and crude weapons. Hideo, the elderly man who warned her earlier, steps forward, his expression a mix of fear and resolve. "We can't let you do this," he says. "The Yamamba demands an offering, and if we don't give her one, she'll take us all." Aiko realizes with horror that the villagers have been sacrificing outsiders for generations to keep the curse at bay. They see her as the next offering, a way to appease the Yamamba and protect themselves. As the villagers close in, Haru suddenly appears, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Stop!" she shouts, stepping between Aiko and the villagers. She is not the one who should be sacrificed. The villagers hesitate, their resolve wavering. Haru turns to Aiko, her eyes filled with sorrow and determination. "You must perform the ritual," she says. "It's the only way to break the curse." Before Aiko can respond, Haru steps forward and plunges a knife into her own chest. The villagers gasp, their faces pale with shock. Haru collapses to the ground, her blood pooling around her. She must act quickly before the villagers recover from their shock. She kneels beside Haru's body and begins the ritual, sprinkling salt in a circle around herself, and placing the lock of Emi's hair at the center. The forest grows silent, the whispers fading into an eerie stillness. Aiko feels a growing pressure in the air, as if the Yamamba is watching her, waiting. As Aiko chants the ritual words, she feels a sudden, overwhelming presence. The Yamamba emerges from the shadows, its form shifting and grotesque, but something is different. The spirit seems weaker, its movement sluggish and uncertain. Aiko realizes that Haru's sacrifice has weakened the Yamamba, giving her a chance to perform the ritual. But her relief is short-lived. The Yamamba reaches out with a clawed hand, and Haru's body is suddenly pulled into the spirit's form. Aiko watches in horror as Haru's face appears within the Yamamba, her eyes wide with terror. The spirit grows stronger, its form solidifying and its eyes glowing with renewed intensity. The Yamamba turns to Aiko, its voice a distorted echo of Haru's. "You cannot win," it whispers. "The curse is eternal, and you are already mine." Aiko feels a surge of fear and despair, but she forces herself to focus. She knows she must complete the ritual, no matter the cost. With Aiko standing in the center of the salt circle, the lock of Emi's hair clutched in her hand, the Yamamba looms before her, its form shifting between the faces of her mother, Emi, and herself. The forest is eerily silent, the only sound the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. Aiko's hands tremble as she recites the final words of the ritual, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The Yamamba's form begins to waver, its edges blurring, as if it's losing its grip on reality. But then it laughs, a cold, mocking sound that sends shivers down Aiko's spine. "You think you can defeat me?" the Yamamba says, its voice a distorted echo of her own. "I am a part of you, Aiko. You can't destroy me without destroying yourself." Aiko takes a deep breath and closes her eyes, focusing on the memories of Emi. She thinks of her sister's laughter, her kindness, and the love they shared. She thinks of her mother, not with anger or resentment, but with understanding and forgiveness. As she opens her eyes, she sees the Yamamba's form beginning to dissolve, its edges fading into the shadows. The spirit's eyes widen with fear and surprise as it realizes what's happening. "No!" it screams, its voice filled with desperation. "You can't do this." But Aiko stands firm, her resolve unshakable. "I forgive you," she whispers, her voice filled with sorrow and acceptance. "And I forgive myself." With those words, the Yamamba's form shatters, its essence dissipating into the air like smoke. The forest grows silent, the whispers fading into an eerie stillness. Emi's voice. As the Yamamba's form dissipates, Aiko hears a faint whisper. "Thank you." She turns and sees a faint glowing figure standing among the trees. It's Emi, her face filled with love and gratitude. Aiko feels a surge of emotion, tears streaming down her face. "Emi," she whispers, her voice trembling. But before she can say more, the figure fades, leaving Aiko alone in the silent forest. Aiko leaves the forest, her heart heavy, but her spirit lighter. She knows she can't stay in the village, not after everything that's happened. As she walks away, she notices something strange. Her shadow moves independently, mimicking her actions with a delay. She stops and looks closer, her breath catching in her throat. Her shadow's eyes glow faintly, a reminder of the curse that still lingers within her. In the final scene, a new family arrives in the village, seeking a fresh start. They are unaware of the curse that has plagued the village for generations. Aiko watches them from the shadows, her eyes glowing faintly. She knows what's coming, but she can't bring herself to warn them. The cycle must continue, and she is now a part of it.